Happy Friday, and it's Notre Dame week. Welcome to the Gold and Black radio pregame show as Purdue renews their rivalry with the Irish in their first visit to Ross-Ade Stadium in over a decade. I'm your host, Derek Schultz. The regular cast of characters are going to join me here in just a little bit. As always, on Friday's show, we're going to break down the key matchups and provide some analysis and historical perspective as well. And there's a lot of history between these two programs who used to play annually for something like 60, 70 years straight before they stopped around 2014. And of course, this will be the first meeting since 2021, a Notre Dame win back in South Bend. But before we get back and get started on today's Friday edition of Gold and Black Radio, we're brought to you by the Purdue Federal Credit Union, a proud partner of Purdue Athletics and the official credit card for Purdue fans. Boiler Up, East End Grill, and Ripple & Company, two distinctive bistros across the street from one another on the far end of Main Street, the perfect place for your next event. And our friends at the Whitaker Inn for unparalleled comfort and cuisine. Visit the Whitaker Inn. Joining us now is no stranger to this show. It's our pal, Tom Dienart. And Tom, like many Purdue fans, Ryan Walters has only been here a little bit over a year, but he said he had this game circled on his calendar. I think it's fair to say plenty of Boilermaker backers feel the same way about Notre Dame being back on again.
Yeah, you're right. Good litmus test, as they say, Derek. And Ryan Walters did not run away from the bigness of this game, if you will. He didn't say it's just another game. We treat all our opponents the same. We all know the ticket buying public that not all games are the same. We don't have to indulge in coach speak. And Ryan Walters certainly sort of broke character from a coaching standpoint with embracing the fact that this is not just another ordinary ball game, Derek. And like I said, litmus test. He's been here about 18 months now, looking for a signature win. So, Derek, it's not only a big game, I think, for Ryan Walters and the program, what he's trying to build. It's a big game for that quarterback, number one, Hudson Card, who also is looking for a signature win. Derek, I still wonder. I know Hudson's very good. I'm still waiting to be wowed by that fourth quarter rally against an elite opponent. Here we go, my friend, 3:30 Central Time Saturday. He's going to get another shot at the most marquee program of them all.
I mean, it's not a stretch to say, Tom, it's the biggest game of his Purdue career, right? To this point, you hope that there's a bigger one maybe somewhere down the line this year, but to this point, it's the biggest game in Hudson Card's Purdue career.
Yeah, without a doubt. Haven't been a lot of them, obviously, so far. And you're right. For him to have more big ones this year, he's got to have a good September. We've talked about how big September is to set up subsequent months and maybe subsequent big games. So, yeah, it's a big game. He does a lot of things very well. He's a terrific athlete. I think he's a good leader. I know he's tough, Derek. And he can make most every throw. He doesn't have Anthony Richardson's arm, but it's more than adequate. I think he still needs to work on his accuracy, particularly on those downfield passes. Once he sharpens that, I think it will be more to his repertoire to make him even more effective. So a lot to like. And I'll tell you what, too, Derek, he's got a lot of great weapons to work with, which could make his job that much more easier this year. And he also is working behind what I think is a better offensive line, too.
Yeah, Tom, I decided after that throw against Houston that he made to Alec Pierce, I'm just not going to compare any beings on earth to Anthony Richardson's arm talent, right? Because that was otherworldly, that throw that he made. You have the bye, you have Indiana State, so you kind of have an overmatched opponent in week one and then an early bye in week two. I'm trying to look at this positively, Tom, because I think a lot of fans were a little bit worried about taking the early break and all of that, but almost like an extension of camp, right? Where you got to feel like you're prepared as possible for this game coming up on Saturday, right? Yeah,
without a doubt. I think if you gave Ryan Walters a shot at true serum, I'd have to think this is set up as well as he could have envisioned. They had their sort of exhibition game, if you will, 49-0. They checked about every box in that game, aside from the penalties, right? Came out of it injury-free. Now they've had an off week to get even healthier. Three key guys are coming back, of course, the starting left tackle, Corey Stewart, being the most key guy of all. And another week to prepare for Notre Dame, And again, I think it's set up as well as you could have envisioned. Here we are at home. And then Notre Dame, Derek, sort of threw a wrench in the storylines, right, by losing last week to Northern Illinois. And everybody's hands were in the air. How's that going to affect Notre Dame? Are they going to come in here angry? Are they going to come in here with their shoulders slumped and doubting themselves? Who knows? I will say this, though. There's no pressure on Ryan Walters. There's a mountain of pressure on Marcus Freeman. Let me just tell you this. He cannot lose to Purdue. He cannot lose to Purdue.
No, I mean, you can imagine you follow a MAC loss with, and I think you and I and most of us agree that 18 of 18 is unfair, but the bottom line is Purdue was picked to finish last in the Big Ten, and they're an in-state school. So if you follow a MAC loss with the team picked last in the Big Ten, then if the alarm bells aren't already ringing, they're going to be really, they're going to be exploding next week in Notre Dame land.
Well, remember after the Texas A&M game, they were already printing college football playoff shirts up in South Bend, right? Yeah. Oh, look at this team's schedule. They're going to roll right through this thing. They're going to be 11-1. Can they make the playoff at 10-2? All the scenarios played out in their head. They lose to Northern Illinois. now here comes Purdue. And let me tell you this, too. I know I mentioned this to you before. It's no secret Brian Walters was not happy about being picked last. And there's no greater motivation in the sporting world. I know it's an old trope. It's trite. It's cliched. But that they disrespected us, chip on the shoulder mantra or storyline or motivational ploy. It's old as the hills, but you know what, Derek? It works.
It does. And I don't think there should be any concern about Ryan Walters and getting this team up for a matchup like this and the circumstances and everything surrounding it. Tom, you had mentioned Corey Stewart's status. I thought Purdue's offensive line held up, albeit against Indiana State, right? So take that with the necessary grain of salt. But how critical is that matchup against Notre Dame's front? We've talked a lot about Notre Dame's secondary, but they've got some good players up front as well. And just, going into every game, controlling the line of scrimmage and giving Hudson Card time and being able to open up lanes for Mockabee and Love and all of that. It's a core tenet, not only for Purdue, but for anybody to have success.
Yeah, you've watched a lot of football, Derek, and it's one up front on both sides of the ball. And who's going to win those battles in the trenches? And you talked about the Purdue O-line. We think it's better. I think it's better. We'll see if it's better. The offensive line in particular you were referring to, Derek. And you're right, that Notre Dame defensive front has got a very good defensive tackle tandem. Howard Cross the third, Riley Mills sort of are the anchors inside. We'll see how Gus Hartwig matches up with those guys, if they ever line up across from Stewart or Marcus Bowe or Musa. So again, it's going to be a great test. This Notre Dame defense, I think we can all agree, right? We're not Notre Dame experts, but I think it's the strength of this team right now, especially the secondary. I know we talked earlier this week. You know those names in that back end of that defense led by Xavier Watts. Going to be a heck of a challenge for Card. Those windows to throw into are going to get a lot narrower, and they're going to close a lot quicker against this secondary. And can these receivers for Purdue, Derek, can they get separation? Can they win physical battles for contested balls? Just so many unknowns here. And it's going to be a lot of fun to finally get a real good look at this Purdue team against a quality opponent, Derek. And it's also a very desperate opponent, too.
Yeah, and a baptism by fire, I think, of sorts, right, for Purdue's receiver group, which we talked about being a big offseason storyline. What can they bring to the table? What can the weapons surrounding Hudson Card do? And, Watts and Morrison, I mean, these guys are going to be playing on Sunday here pretty soon. So a really great test for them.
You're right. And, it's there's talent on this Purdue receiving core, but, it's largely inexperienced. Jamal Edrin, of course, looks like the alpha. We saw him make his Purdue debut last weekend. Cam Brown's going to be available. Of course, he was a transfer receiver from UCLA. The freshman Shamar Rigby, Jerron Tibbs from Indianapolis Cathedral. A lot of very promising options at receiver that we saw on display against Indiana State. They're, of course, going to be without their fastest receiver. C.J. Smith from Georgia is going to miss a second game in a row with a hamstring injury. But still, plenty of weapons, I think, at receiver. And then, of course, Derek, we've talked a lot about the tight ends. And, of course, Max Clare leads that parade. Max may have to catch 10 passes Saturday. But, again, if you're Hudson Card, boy, you got to like your options to throw the ball. And you know what, Derek? They can throw to those running backs, too, Reggie Love and Devin Mockabee. So maybe I'm making too big of a deal out of Purdue's offense, but I think it can be a pretty good offense this year.
Yeah, 12 players caught a pass in week one. Again, this sounds like a recording. grain of salt, Indiana State, right? Blowout game. But still, I think you feel better about the options that are available. But I think it'll be interesting to see how much Card leans into, his security blankets and Claire and people like that, especially given the opponent that we're about to see. Concern, Tom, on your end about Riley Leonard's running ability? Purdue hasn't faced this a ton, but you think back to last year, Tanner Mordecai, Wisconsin had some success. I don't even want to talk about the Garrett Schrader, Syracuse. I think he's still running, right? with what he did in that game almost exactly a year ago. But how big of a threat is that and a challenge for this Purdue defense as well, to kind of keep them honest on that end?
Yeah, Garrett Schrader, boy, that's a deep cut from last year. You're right, and I'm sure Notre Dame's well aware of Purdue's issues with containing the quarterback run, and that just happens to be, Derek, a strength of Riley Leonard's is the run. He certainly hasn't been a good passer thus far this year, but he can run the ball, and I'm sure they're going to try to utilize those skills. Will Purdue put a spy on him? Will Antonio Stevens spy him? Will Kendrick Breedlove spy him? Will Jenkins spy him? I don't know, but they got to contain Leonard and not let his feet beat this Purdue defense. So it's going to be a fun chess match there. Will his injury affect him? Again, it's his non-throwing shoulder. If he's running the football, maybe that shoulder injury gets aggravated, right? So again, that certainly is a concern. It wouldn't be so much so if he was more of a drop back quarterback, but the fact that he's always on the run and moving, that shoulder is going to be susceptible, Derek. So maybe we see the backup Notre Dame quarterback on Saturday. So it's going to be interesting to watch how Riley Leonard is deployed by Notre Dame.
We're only 2 weeks in, but only 5 teams, including Notre Dame, have yet to throw a touchdown pass this season. So that's how bad the passing offense has been so far to this point for the Irish. It's not been pretty for them.
But they do have a couple of good receivers. If Leonard can find time and get the ball to those guys, that could be some playmakers for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Final one here, Tom. Special teams, we feeling pretty good. I mean, after last year, I think the Indiana State opener was a refreshing change of pace.
Yeah, coverages are zipped up. The punting game was fine. I mean, again, they checked every box. They didn't attempt a field goal. 7 for 7 on PATs with Spencer Porath, the true freshman from Brownsburg, Indiana. He had, I think, one extended PAT. They had a penalty. They had to push him back, so it was a longer PAT. I know the special teams coach was glad he got to take a crack at that. We'll see. Again, I think I know Chris Petrelli works mighty hard there, and those players love to play for him. Of course, the one spot, let's not kid ourselves. We're all watching the kicking, right? Again, Spencer Porath. How's he going to do kicking field goals? Well, I mean, everybody's going to be holding their breath there. I guarantee you the first time he goes out there to kick a field goal, we'll see how he does. I don't know how they do it. I couldn't do it, Derek. I couldn't do it. That's why I was always the guy sitting in the stands with my flask and acting like I knew something. So, yeah, we'll see. So fingers are crossing on that staff that Spencer can bring some consistency to the place kicking. And, Derek, maybe he can even hit some big kicks. And I'll tell you what, I've said this before. If he's going to have a good year, he's probably going to have to make a couple big kicks to maybe even win games.
Yeah, I can't even make putts when we're playing competitive twosomes with my buddies. You know what I mean? And obviously much different stakes in a 3:30 game against Notre Dame when they're in your stadium for Spencer Porath coming up here. And that's kind of the one rep that we didn't really get to see. I mean, everybody else got the reps that they needed in Indiana State. And I guess it's a good problem to have when you're just scoring touchdowns the entire time, but we didn't get to see that 2 weeks ago in week 1. Tom, you had the chance to talk on the Notre Dame side of things, and we're going to get to that conversation here in just a little bit, and we'll bring you back on with the other guys to wrap up later today as we talk about things to watch out for, final keys, and we'll go around the Big Ten as well. But thanks so much, Tom.
You bet. Thank you very much, Derek.
That's Tom Dienart, and he'll be back on the show, like I mentioned, here in just a little bit. His conversation with Dylan Sin, who covers the Irish for the Journal-Gazette in Fort Wayne, is coming up here in just a few moments. But wanted to remind you of our friends at Sand Valley Resort. It's just, 1, 2, 3 weeks away. If you're heading up to Camp Randall to see the Boilermakers take on the Wisconsin Badgers on October 5th, you can sign up to win 4 tickets to the game, plus an overnight stay at Sand Valley, which is your new winter resort giveaway, just an hour and a half from Madison. As much as I can't stand Wisconsin, as much as the long losing skid in football that lasts, 20 years has caused a lot of stress and anxiety, Madison is an awesome college town. and a great place to visit. And Camp Randall is a fantastic place to visit as well if you've never been. You should visit sandvalleypursuits.com/Purdue giveaway to enter their drawing. 4 tickets plus an overnight stay at Sand Valley Resort, your new winter resort getaway, just an hour and a half, quick hop, skip, and a jump away from Madison to go to the game coming up that weekend. Here's that conversation with Dylan Sin and our friend Tom Dienert as we were talking about Notre Dame and coming in after a shocking loss to Northern Illinois, and as they head into a 3:30 kick at Ross-Ade Stadium for the first time since 2013.
Hey, we are joined by Dylan Sin of the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette, the great Dylan Sin, a good guy, covers a lot of things. And Dylan's going to kind of give us a little skinny on Notre Dame, Purdue's opponent. 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time kickoff on CBS. Dylan, welcome. Always good to see you, my friend. Let's jump right in. Offense, Notre Dame has not been good thus far in 2024. Sort of give us maybe a quick skinny on what Purdue fans can expect to see from that Fighting Irish offense on Saturday.
Yeah, well, it's kind of unclear what you could expect to see from the Irish offense on Saturday, because what they showed against Northern Illinois was not good, and so you think they're going to try to make some adjustments. Usually, the quarterback run game is a significant part of what they do. They did that a significant part against Texas A&M. Riley Leonard is a good runner. He's a strong runner. He runs like a 4.6 or a 4.7 in the 40s. So he's got some wheels, and then Notre Dame has a good stable of running backs with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and Anias Williams and guys like that. And so they move the ball well on the ground. The problem is right now that they didn't do the quarterback run at all for the second half against Northern Illinois. Part of that was because they didn't have a whole lot of plays. Northern Illinois controlled the ball. But also yesterday there were reports that Riley Leonard is nursing an injury to his non-throwing shoulder. So that might have played a role as well. Coach Mike Denbrock said that it did, or offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock said that it did not. So we'll see whether that changes on Saturday at all. I do expect to run the ball plenty. Jeremiah Love is a very, very good running back, averaging almost 7 yards a carry through 2 games. The passing game is where it kind of gets tricky for Notre Dame. They haven't passed the ball well at all. Riley Leonard is completing less than 60%, barely 60% of his passes for about 5 yards per attempt, which is obviously not what you want. And they haven't been able to hit any downfield shots really at all. Nothing more than like 20 yards, I think, was the longest completion to Bo Collins against Texas A&M, who is their best receiver. He's very good, transfer from Clemson. And they have some weapons on the outside. Chris Mitchell, transfer from FIU. Mitchell Evans, the preseason All-American tight end, who is still kind of rounding into form. As they try to get him back from an ACL injury at the end of last season. But yeah, it's kind of unclear what form this offense is going to take. Because clearly what they did against NIU was not good enough. They're probably going to make some adjustments. I expect them to go with more QB run if Leonard is able to do so, because that worked against NIU. That was basically the one thing that worked on a consistent basis against NIU. But obviously Purdue is going to try to pack the box and make that very difficult. So they're probably going to have to hit some shots downfield at least a little bit. We'll see. I think probably Mitchell and Collins are going to need to step up in this game if Notre Dame is going to be able to move the ball. So I'm interested to see. I think Purdue will try to make Notre Dame one-dimensional. I think that's probably the right move. Come after Leonard, make him uncomfortable. He was uncomfortable at times against NIU. He bailed out of the pocket too early. That's something that they know he needs to work on. And so I think that's going to be a key to the game, is whether they can get him out of rhythm.
Now, defensively, Dylan, that seems to be where Notre Dame sort of hangs its hat, if you will. The secondary in particular appears to be outstanding. Sort of discuss some of the challenges that Notre Dame defense will pose for Purdue's offense on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, it is. You hit it on the head with the secondary. It's very, very good. Xavier Watts, the safety, won the Bronco Nagurski Award as the best defensive player in the country last year. And I think he's gotten better this offseason. He's really, really good. He was great in run support against NIU in a way that he really wasn't last year. Last year, he was kind of just a ball hawk sitting back there and picking off passes, kind of a Dylan Thieneman type. But no, he's very good. Benjamin Morrison is one of the best cornerbacks in the country. so they have guys back there in the secondary that are going to make you pay if you're not accurate with the ball or if you're not making the right reads. But it's not like they're weak up front either. They have one of the best defensive tackle duos in the country in Howard Cross III and Riley Mills, both of whom are very, very good. And so I do think that's another part of it, is that they can get pressure with 4 most of the time, and then that secondary is able to kind of sit back there and really wait on the quarterback to make a mistake. I think that was the one issue against NIU, was that when guys were able to get past that first line of defense, the linebackers I didn't think were great with their run fits. I thought that the NIU got some extra yards because the linebackers weren't always in the position they were supposed to be. Drake Bowen and Jalen Sneed are 2 new starters at that position, and they're very good. They're very talented. They're high-level recruits, but they're still new starters, right? And so they're figuring things out, and I think that's where Purdue will probably try to have some success early on, is replicating what NIU did. A lot of misdirection in the run game, trying to get these guys to mistrust their eyes. And I think that's probably the right move. And so once you get the run game going, then you can try to hit a shot over the top and see if you can get something to Jamal Adrin or Leland Smith or someone like that. And I do think that's probably the right move, because you have to establish the run against Notre Dame to even give that secondary something to think about. Because if you're just sitting there and pass the entire game, they are going to be salivating. And so I do think that's what NIU did correctly, was just do a bunch of different things in the run game, kind of get them out of position a little bit, and then hit the pass. I think that worked very well.
And how do you see this unfolding Saturday, Dylan? Of course, not sure what Notre Dame's mindset will be after that upset loss. I'm sure they will be angry, but how do you see this thing unfolding? The Irish are going to come in at least as a double-digit favorite here.
Yeah, I think Purdue keeps it close. If absolutely, I don't think this is the blowout in any way. I'm not a gambling man myself, but if the spread is double digits, I would take Purdue to cover. And so I think that Notre Dame's offense is just not good enough right now to really blow anyone out. And I do think this game comes down to a couple of big plays, kind of like it did against Texas A&M. Notre Dame in that game was able to make the 2 big plays that had the 2 touchdown runs of 25 plus yards to win or 20 plus yards to win the game in the second half. And so that was all they needed. I think that if Purdue can avoid those types of big plays, if you make Notre Dame drive down the field 5, 6, 7 yards at a time, I don't know if Notre Dame is capable of doing that right now. I think that is going to be very tough for them. They haven't been able to sustain drives basically in either of their 2 games. It's been very difficult. And so the only time they did it was the very first drive, the scripted drive against NIU. And then after that, they were pretty hapless the rest of the day. And so I'm interested to see if Purdue can do that. Can you get pressure, enough pressure up front? Can you get to Leonard fast enough so that those receivers can't get open? And I do think that that's a matchup where Purdue has an advantage. I think that their cornerbacks can hold on to those receivers at least long enough to let those guys, Will Helt and company get home up front. I think that is something that could happen. So if Purdue can avoid big plays, they're going to be in this game until the end and have a chance to win it. Then it's just a matter of, okay, which offense is able to run the ball more efficiently. And so I would pick Notre Dame to win. I'm not confident in that prediction at all. I'm really interested to see how Notre Dame bounces back from that NIU game. I do think that they'll have a good mindset going into that game. I think they have the veteran leadership on that team that tells me we're not going to let that happen again. But they just weren't good in that game. It wasn't really like they blew it or came out flat or anything like that. They just weren't good schematically. And so it's a question of, can you make the scheme corrections to beat Purdue? And I'm not sure they can. So we'll have to see. And I'm looking forward to a good game.
It ought to be good, Dylan. Notre Dame hasn't been to Ross-Ade Stadium since 2013. It's going to be a sellout crowd. Hopefully the weather will be good. I look forward to seeing you. And thank you very much again for stopping by.
Absolutely, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much to Dylan Sin for that Notre Dame preview as we head into the Irish and Boilermakers renewing their rivalry for the first time since 2021. And this game will stay on the schedule for the next couple of years as well, through 2028, I believe, for Notre Dame and Purdue. Another shout out to our sponsors, Purdue Federal Credit Union, a proud partner of Purdue Athletics and the official credit card for Purdue fans. Boiler up. East End Grill and Ripple and Company, two distinctive bistros across the street from one another on the far end of Main Street, the perfect place for your next event. And our friends at the Whitaker Inn for unparalleled comfort and cuisine. Visit the Whitaker Inn. One of our other friends is Brian Newbert of goldenblack.com, and he joins us now to talk Notre Dame and Purdue. You've done a lot of these over the years, and not to make you sound old, that actually makes me kind of sound old
it is
as
what
well.
It is.
This is still a game that it's inherently meaningful, right? For Purdue, especially if you stuck around or if you're like in the Chicago area or if you stuck around Indiana, I still feel like this has got to be, maybe if you're a Boilermaker that's in like California or something, maybe you don't care as much. But I still feel like even 10 years after this has been an annual game, for the people that remember this being an every year game, it's a big deal. Am I wrong?
No, you aren't wrong. It is a big deal for Purdue. I think anything that puts Purdue on a national stage is a big deal for Purdue. I think when you reside in Indiana, obviously Notre Dame is more of a national brand than it is an in-state brand, but still you've got Subway alumni everywhere in this state and all around the country, including our native Northeast, as you well know. But no, it's a huge game, for better or worse. When Notre Dame is good, Notre Dame is in the spotlight. When Notre Dame is bad, the palace intrigue that follows them around everywhere they go makes them really interesting and makes them a story. So anytime you set foot on the field with Notre Dame, it is a big deal. And, Purdue's capitalized on that probably as much as anyone outside of that small circle of programs like the USCs and the Ohio States and Michigans to enhance itself. A lot of the biggest wins in school history are a lot of the most memorable wins in school history as well are, against Notre Dame. And I've always kind of said that about Purdue, is that, like, especially at this stage of the game, it's about winning and losing, sure, but it's also about making memories, making experiences. And I think a lot of the Purdue people you talk to, if you ask them, what are your top 10 memories of Purdue football from your life watching it, 5 or 6 of them would involve Notre Dame. That might be overstatement a little bit, but a lot of them would. As you mentioned, I've been around a long time, longer than I care to admit. And, that 97 game was a really big deal. The 99 game, the Taylor Stubblefield game in South Bend was a really big deal. Just on and on and on. And now this isn't a yearly thing for Purdue anymore. And you can make an argument that, the competitive situation in the Big Ten now makes these games less valuable than they used to be, because they're obviously hard games. Whereas you can schedule 3-0 very easily. When wins thereafter are going to be really hard to come by. But nevertheless, it is a big deal. It puts Purdue squarely in the national spotlight. It's a golden opportunity for them, like it always is. I
really doubt Purdue's mentality has changed from the Northern Illinois loss, but has the fan mentality changed from, man, I hope we can compete in this thing, to, man, I hope we can win this thing, if you're a Purdue fan, given what just happened in South Bend last week?
Well, if it bleeds, you can kill it, right? To quote Predator. I think
there's definitely blood in the water, right?
Had Notre Dame won that game, coming off the adrenaline of the Texas A&M game, you would have looked at a 2-0 Notre Dame team, and everybody nationally would be swooning over Notre Dame. The playoffs expanded now. Notre Dame has relatively easy access to the playoff, and people would be getting over their skis about Notre Dame like they always do. But now you also run the risk of the overreaction going the other way, where people write Notre Dame off. I'd imagine Purdue is not paying attention to the national conversation around Notre Dame, nor should they be. But I think simply the revelation of vulnerability in Notre Dame is probably something that, has Purdue's eyes perked up.
Yeah. What, in your eyes, is the most critical matchup in this game? Because there are a lot of interesting things at play here. I mean, obviously with the two quarterbacks, and we were just talking about with Tom, biggest game of Hudson Card's career, right? And kind of a prove-it game against a really good Notre Dame defense. I know they maybe didn't show that as much against NIU. Purdue's defense against Riley Leonard and what looks like a pretty limited Notre Dame offense so far. That's another matchup. Purdue's receivers against these NFL-bound cornerbacks for Notre Dame. I think there are a lot of ways that you can go, but what are you most interested in seeing coming up on Saturday afternoon play out on the field?
I don't want to repeat what Tom said, but I'm going to repeat what Tom said. It is Hudson Card's day. I mean, if he is Purdue's best chance. That said, the nature of the quarterback position is everybody else has to be good for you to be great. And, I think looking at Purdue's receivers, are they ready for this challenge? Looking at Purdue's offensive front, are they ready for this challenge? But Purdue's going to win or lose this game, most likely based on the quarterback's play. When Purdue's beaten Notre Dame in the past, and the past has nothing to do with the present, but it's been quarterback play. It has to be quarterback play. That's kind of the nature of Purdue. That's the nature of the position. But I think, people might sleep on Hudson Card a little bit because, he's not necessarily squarely in the national conversation. There's probably a lot of people out there that don't even realize he's at Purdue. He was kind of banged up last year, so maybe didn't have the sort of statement year that he was capable of under a first-year staff. But I think that he's very talented, and he's very good, and he's very versatile. And this game might come down to him not only putting up big numbers, but making big third-down throws, stealing a third down with his legs here and there, not turning the ball over, obviously. So at Purdue, historically, it's always come down to the quarterback, and I don't think this game's any different.
Yeah, I think there's a reason why Drew Brees and Mike Phipps and Bob Greasy and Kyle Orton were the winning quarterbacks against Notre Dame, and Robert Marve and Rob Henry and people like that were not, right? No offense to those guys if they're they were good players at times. Sorry if that was. I don't want to be mean-spirited on the show, but just to kind of trumpet your point, the cradle of quarterback guys are the ones that have collected wins in this series for the most part against Notre Dame in this matchup.
It's Billy Dick and it's Bob Greasy. I mentioned Billy Dick first because for some reason he came to mind because of that 1997 game. Drew Brees, although Drew Brees could have beaten them a few more times than he actually did. Kyle Orton obviously, was the quote unquote engineer of that route up in South Bend years ago. The unsportsmanlike, the greatest penalty in Purdue football history. The premature celebration by Taylor
all the way down the sideline. Yes.
Yeah, I don't think anyone lamented that 15 yards. But no, that is Purdue. That is Purdue's identity, and that is what we talk about every time they have to go find a coach. Is you have to embrace your identity, and that is quarterback play. And you win games like this with quarterbacks, and I think if Purdue's going to win this game on Saturday, the story afterwards has to be that, hey, Hudson Card was pretty damn good. He was a big time recruit out of high school for a reason. He's going to be on an NFL roster potentially a year from now for a reason. I think he's better than he gets credit for.
Yeah, and now he's got the chance to prove that to everybody else. I think we've kind of seen that from behind the scenes, but now he's got the stage to prove it to the people that aren't at practices and camp and things like that. Brian, we appreciate it, man. We'll bring you back on here for the Big Ten conversation and everything else here in just a bit.
I hope you could hear me okay. My microphone's actually pointing the wrong way.
Sounds great to me. Yeah.
I hope it's not recording my fan overhead instead of me. So
I just like the sound of your voice no matter what, man. That's all.
All right, Derek. Thanks, man.
That's our pal Brian Newberg. Alan Karpick, I'm sure your ears were burning there. We're dropping like Mike Phipps references and stuff as the resident historian of Purdue. I saw that you've been attending games since 1967 in this series. Is that right?
Right. I was raised Catholic, and I had great faith in the day. I was the fourth of five kids and didn't rank for some reason. And I was 7 years old. I got tickets to that game. I'm not sure why. That was the first time I prayed for divine intervention. I can't say that my faith has stayed the same over my 64 years, but that September, it was a cold September 30th, I think it was the date, a cool one, I should say. I got tickets to that game, and Purdue wins that 128-21. Notre Dame #1. Mike Phipps gets on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Only time a current Purdue athlete had been on the cover, at least to that point. I know Rick Mount was on there, but he wasn't. He was at Lebanon High School, not in West Lafayette. So it was a big deal that day back in 1967.
And 84 meetings between these schools, and that's pretty impressive considering that over the last 10 years they've only played once. That was a Jeff Brom era game that Purdue ended up losing in South Bend, but I want to say that was like a one-score game basically for 3 quarters, and then Notre Dame tacked one on late and then kind of put it in cruise control after that. But that was a competitive game, and even some of these other ones that they've played recently, recently as far as the series is concerned. The 2009 game, Danny Hope and Purdue needed or Notre Dame needed a fourth and goal conversion. I think it was a Jimmy Clausen to Kyle Rudolph touchdown pass to win that game. If I remember right, Danny Hope called a timeout at one point.
Infamous timeout. He never lived that down.
Why are you Notre Dame was completely scrambling, and it kind of gave them a chance to gather themselves, but I don't want to, bring up the PTSD moments of this series. And then the last game at Ross-Ade, Allen, was a game Purdue led 10-0. They led at halftime. Rob Henry pick six late, and Notre Dame ended up holding on for a touchdown win. But even in some of these games where Notre Dame has come in as a heavy favorite, like they will on Saturday, I think it's 10.5 points, 11 the last time that I checked. Purdue has, at the very least, held their own, and I think a lot of fans are expecting the same thing. But as I said with Brian, I think this is transition from we'd be happy just competing to, hey, let's go out and win the darn thing.
Yeah, and I don't think that the Northern Illinois loss for Notre Dame really changed anything from that standpoint, Derek. I think that Purdue needs, as Brian and Tom have pointed out, Purdue needs this game to prove that it belongs in some level in whatever conversation they're having in college football. But yeah, that's been the history of this series for Purdue. There have been some great upsets. Some Purdue fans hate the word Boilermakers. That came into vogue in the 1950s. Dale Samuels, 93 years old, will be in the stands on Saturday. And he engineered the game that really changed the flavor of Purdue football history in 1950. In fact, October 7th, 1950, a 28-14 win against a Notre Dame team that was a defending national champs, but they weren't all that good. Purdue beats them and stops Frank Leahy's 39-game winning streak. But Len Dawson, you guys have talked about that. He had a seminal moment in 1954, stopping the 20-game Notre Dame record or winning streak. Bob Greasy goes 19 for 22 for 283 yards, all Purdue records back in 1965, the Irish #1. None of those games were on national TV like they would be today, but they were a big deal. And of course, that game in 67, and maybe the pinnacle game of them all, Derek, long before you were born, but 1968, Purdue, can you imagine Purdue in a battle of 2 #1 teams? Purdue ranked in the coaches poll, UPI at the time, beats Notre Dame 37-22 in a game that was on television. You can watch it on YouTube if you want to go down a rabbit hole. It's fun to watch. Chris Schenkel, a former Purdue student, did that game with Bud Wilkinson and Leroy Keys, and a guy named Bob Dillingham, who lives in Indianapolis still, had one of a career day that day, and Purdue beat Notre Dame. Those were the days that formed Purdue and put Purdue as much on a national stage as it's ever been on a program. And as Brian said earlier, and Tom has alluded to, it is what Purdue is all about. It's not minimizing Purdue's role in the world of college football, but it shows the power of Notre Dame. In the first 50 years of the 20th century, it was Joe Louis, it was the New York Yankees, and it was Notre Dame football. Yeah. And that's what it was. And when you beat Notre Dame, it was a big deal.
And you mentioned that era, 1950 to 1970, Purdue won 12 of the 20 matchups. And a lot of those were games that really mattered. Not that the 2007 game didn't matter, but you're talking about a 3-9 Notre Dame team against a Little Caesars Bowl Purdue team or whatever game, they ended up playing in that year. There were much higher stakes in that game. And that's what's kind of interesting about the rivalry is that it's like Purdue, outside of that, obviously prolonged success in Notre Dame, they've had these little spurts, like late 70s Mark Herman era into Jim Everett into the 80s. And then, of course, the Breeze era into the Orton era, where they all those games seemingly were really competitive, 50-50 coin flip type games. And Purdue, got the better end of a lot of them.
Yeah, and Purdue played Notre Dame, as Tom pointed out, 1946 to 2014, right? But from 1986 to 1997, Purdue not only got beat every year. Lou Holtz was the majority of the Lou Holtz. That was the Lou Holtz era. Boilermakers weren't competitive. That's what made that 1997 game with Billy Dicken and Joe Tiller so meaningful. Not only did Purdue lose, Toledo the week before, they come in as a 19.5-point underdog and beat Notre Dame relatively soundly, or at least really they deserved to win that game, a 28-17 win. That is where, again, that's the thing, as Joe Tiller said about the 1997 season, it was Christmas every week. Well, Christmas came also in September that year when Purdue beat Notre Dame, and that's led to 3 games that year where fans were on the field trying to tear down the goalpost, and one of those games was that Notre Dame win.
I just looked in that 1967 game. That was a Purdue win that you got to see, correct?
That absolutely 28-21. I can remember scores of those games better than I can remember my wedding anniversary sometimes. But absolutely, it was a magical day for not only Leroy Keys was playing both ways, and not as much he played, but Jim Seymour had the big game the year before in the '66 national championship Notre Dame team. They brought in Leroy Keys to defend on Jim Seymour. They did a good enough job and won that game. A great day for Purdue, certainly back in 1967. Purdue finished, let's talk about next week's game against Oregon State. Oregon State ruined Purdue's season that year in a lot of ways by beating Purdue when Purdue was number 2 in the country on homecoming after that Notre Dame game. But Notre Dame game, you don't forget.
One other thing, Alan, that I have for you, and this is going to put you on the spot a little bit, and I had to look this up because, unlike you, I actually have to look up these things.
No. My memory's not so good.
So I mentioned, Purdue has played Notre Dame 84 times. That's more than all but 5 traditional Big Ten teams, and I'm including Nebraska and all of them in there, even though, obviously Nebraska's only been in the league, 10, 12 years. Do you happen to know in their modern history, so I'm not talking University of Chicago, their second most played non-conference opponent? Let me, it's a little bit of a trick question. A non-conference opponent, this is going to give it away.
I need it. I'm struggling here. So I'm drawing blanks.
Okay. How about this for Ned? They are now a conference opponent.
Yeah. I mean,
this shocked me.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of that, and having that now you've got me completely thrown. It certainly isn't Penn State. It's not Nebraska. It's not USC. It's not UCLA. Is it Washington?
It's Washington. They've played Washington 10 times.
Question.
Isn't that crazy?
And didn't beat them very often. They had several tie games and weird games in the 1960s. And of course, we talked about Gary Danielson doing the game this week for CBS. Gary Danielson was involved in the game his senior year where Purdue led 21-0. He ran for over 200 yards in the first half.
Wow.
In that game against Washington. And of course, Washington's Sonny Sixth going to come back and beat Purdue. Danielson had the flu, couldn't play in the second half. Long story, but Gary Danielson remembers it. We talked about it a little bit this week.
Yeah, that'll be fun to have.
Well, I'm glad you let me into that because I was drawing a blank, and I said I kept drawing that. I was looking for you to nod to say Washington.
Yep, I was just thinking I don't know, like Miami of Ohio. Or,
I mean?
Like I was thinking any number of teams that it could have been, and I'm scrolling down the list, and then there's Washington, and I'm like, wow, Washington. I thought even Ball State or somebody like that would be. Yeah. Somewhere on there. So yeah, interesting little factoid.
Great question. I love it.
And now they're going to be conference opponents, which is just weird.
But it is always.
Here we are. It is a brave new world.
But that is the one thing I think, Derek, about Saturday's game that kind of brings some level in today's crazy world of college football. If you're a Purdue fan, and even in Notre Dame, and I understand this rivalry was a lot bigger for Purdue than it's been for Notre Dame over the years. I get that. Though Notre Dame, Moose Krause back in 1946 made a commitment to Red Mackey. We're going to play you every year. They didn't play Michigan every year. They didn't play Michigan State every year, and they chose to play Purdue. But this is a game that brings some level of tradition and normalcy to this world, and Purdue fans have to be excited to see those Notre Dame helmets back in Ross-Ade Stadium because that's what Purdue fans were used to seeing for a very, very long time.
Let's bring back our pal Brian Newbert as well as we start to wrap up, and Tom Dienhart too. So we'll get a full panel here on the show as we conclude before the Notre Dame preview. Something new, I guess, that we talked on a text thread about doing is anything that kind of jumps out to you guys in the week in the Big Ten. And I'm going to use one here, not to bring up an even bigger rival than Notre Dame, but I am absolutely fascinated by this IU-UCLA game on both fronts. And I've been banging the table about this, and I don't know, am I hoping to be right or am I hoping to be wrong here? I refuse to believe that Purdue's going to finish behind UCLA. I refuse to believe it. But that would require Indiana going there and winning, and it's kind of like, well, do I want that to happen or not? But I think for both teams, I don't know how much you read into 77 points against a program like Western Illinois for IU, but certainly better to look good than to look bad. But that's one that really jumps out to me for this week, and I'm sure you guys agree.
Well, Brian, I'll let you go with that one because I think you've written a little bit about UCLA in the Big Ten, but you go ahead and start.
I think that of all the collateral damage competitively among the 18 schools now in the Big Ten, we obviously look at it from a Purdue perspective, and this did Purdue no favors. This did Illinois and Indiana no favors. This did Northwestern no favors, Rutgers. But I think UCLA is the most competitively compromised school in this whole conference now because they're not particularly good. They've always kind of struggled for relevance. They've always kind of struggled in recruiting to get kids over USC and Oregon and the schools they are still recruiting against because they're in the Big Ten too. They have to travel to all their road games significantly, as Purdue has to, but Purdue's really probably only got to do it once or twice a year max. UCLA, everywhere they go outside of the other three Pac-12 schools, is has to leave its region. Recruiting is going to be really interesting for this Pac-4 that's been stapled to the Big Ten because you have to recruit California kids. You have to get the best players in California. All four of those programs do. Do California kids want to play at Iowa in February? Now, USC and UCLA are still the biggest brands in that region. They're going to get their guys, but they're not going to have the same enthusiasm about who they're playing against. I would imagine that it was much more appealing for USC to recruit guys to say, hey, you're going to play at Stanford and Cal, and you're going to play, where your family can actually watch you and things like that versus, hey, we're going to fly all the way across the country to play a school that you couldn't even tell us where it is, that being Rutgers or Maryland, one or the other. You're going to play in 10-degree weather in February against Iowa, which is inevitably going to happen. So this is probably a soft start for UCLA because I think Indiana's got a lot to prove. Their 2 wins are empty calories, which is fine. No one should apologize for scheduling wins anymore. But, this is kind of a legitimacy game for Indiana. This isn't Michigan or Ohio State showing up at UCLA for the first game of UCLA's run in the Big Ten. We're in LA, by the way.
Yeah.
I just think it's an interesting game because it's going to be interesting to see, does the West Coast teams change the Big Ten or does the Big Ten change the West Coast teams? Now, Indiana is not exactly Iowa or Michigan or Ohio State from a style of play perspective, but it is going to be interesting to see how those teams can, stack up at the line of scrimmage and things like that. Going to be interesting to see how some of the traditional Big Ten schools match up to California speed, style of play, stuff like that. And I don't know if this game is the referendum on all of that stuff, but it is at least a peak.
I'm also interested to see if they're going to open themselves up for some embarrassment. We know the fan following isn't great out there. I mean, when Ohio State plays at UCLA, Tom, it's going to be a home game. Mm-hmm. It's going to be all red. I mean, they're going to any Ohio State grad within 3 hours of Los Angeles is going to be at that game, right? Taking over that stadium, I would think.
Yeah, you're right. Just a great opportunity to get to a great part of the country at a great venue in Pasadena. And you're right, Derek. Those are going to be almost some ways de facto home games for a lot of those Big Ten teams when they get out there. I'm sure there'll be a lot of Purdue fans making those trips as well. And
sure.
Yeah, and again, speaking of the West Coast, I think those are the two games of intrigue in the Big Ten this weekend: the Apple Cup, and the Civil War, especially the Civil War. I'm still going to call it the Civil War.
Yeah.
Oregon's at Oregon State in Corvallis, and each team's 2-0. I think we've talked about Oregon's struggles here, have not looked stellar. The Beavers want this bad, man. That place is going to be packed. That's going to be a fun game. The Cougars are in Seattle, so that's going to be a tougher battle for them. Again, I'm going to watch that Civil War game and see if maybe the Beavers can pull them off. And, of course, guys, next Saturday after this, Purdue treks out to Corvallis themselves.
Yeah, you have to wonder if Purdue's going to benefit for 2 straight weeks from the team that the other team played the week before. We'll find out, about that. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, and, Alan, both teams will be coming down from amping themselves up for big games too. So I'm interested to see how Purdue and Oregon State handle that, even forgetting what the results may be against Notre Dame and Oregon, but amping yourselves up, and then suddenly you're playing this really random game against each other in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. I guess, and lastly, the other Big Ten game, the Alabama-Wisconsin game, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
just Wisconsin future opponent, of course, and it'll be interesting to see what they have, and the fact that Alabama's going there, you know what I mean? They're not playing in Dallas or Atlanta, or generally speaking, when Alabama has played these games, it's been somewhere like that.
I think LSU and Wisconsin played in Green Bay a few years ago. But you're right.
But how did that game come about? Because didn't Alabama play, or Wisconsin and Alabama play a few years ago? This wasn't a return game, right? I didn't understand how that game got to Camp Randall.
This is going to be a fun game, a big game for obviously Luke Fickell too, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of Badger fans wonder if he's the guy. And Kalen DeBoer, it's gonna be a fun game.
Yeah,
we'll see. There's a lot of wondering about coaches right now. I think Purdue's opponent on Saturday has a lot of people wondering about that coach as well. But hopefully, we'll get some more answers about the coach in year 2 at Purdue coming up 3:30 on Saturday. Guys, appreciate it. goldenblack.com, of course, will have all of your coverage for the next 24 hours leading up to kick between Notre Dame and Purdue at 3:30. If you're not already a subscriber, you get access to it all. Tom's great reporting, Brian's great reporting, Alan's crazy brain where he can just rattle off scores from memory like he can. You get all of that with the goldenblack.com subscription, and access to Knucklehead Central, which is even better because everybody loves Knucklehead Central. Thanks one last time to our great sponsors, Purdue Federal Credit Union, the official credit card for Purdue fans, East End Grill and Ripple and Company, 2 distinctive bistros across the street from one another on the far end of Main Street in Lafayette. The Whitaker Inn, the Midwestern oasis, perfect for a relaxing staycation or a weekend getaway. You can escape from the ordinary at the Whitaker Inn. And we were just talking about Camp Randall at Sand Valley Resort. Our pals there, if you sign up at sandvalleypursuits.com/Purdue giveaway, you win free tickets. You'll have the chance to win free tickets, I should say. I can't guarantee it. For the October 5th game between Purdue and Wisconsin at Camp Randall. Thanks so much for joining us here on Golden Black Radio. We'll see you for the Saturday simulcast after Notre Dame and Purdue.